Just watched the president there. He says he's starting to feel good, but there have, of course, been these conflicting reports about the president's health. What's the UK government been told about the condition of the president?
Well, I think we've all just seen. I mean, for somebody who's been suffering with COVID over the last few days and obviously has been in hospital, I have to say he looks in pretty good strength there to me. As I saw the interview earlier on with Nigel Farage, I think the point he was making was a fair point. He looks in pretty good health. Obviously, it's a matter for him and his medical team, but that looked like somebody who's pretty straightforward and able to explain where they are and what they're doing and their hopes for the future of their country.
I guess some of the scepticism felt by some in the UK may come from what happened with Boris Johnson, and there are these kind of echoes of what happened with the Prime Minister here. You know, we were told at the time that he was in good spirits, that moving to hospital was just precautionary, and of course he ended up in intensive care. It felt like Number 10 weren't upfront with us about the Prime Minister's health. Do you think there is a risk that the same thing is happening in the White House?
Well, a couple of things I'd say is, first of all, with the Prime Minister here, just a couple of days before he was in hospital, I was on a conference call with him and he was speaking fine and seemed to be doing very, very well. And I think it's a reminder, actually, what we saw with the Prime Minister, of two things. First of all, we're a few months on from that, and this is still a new virus. I mean, this virus has been with us for under about a year now. We're still learning things as we go forward, and I think that the learning over the last few months would have made a difference in terms of how people are being treated and how care is being taken forward. But I think, again, it's also a reminder. The second point I would make is how quickly this can move and the impact this can have. And as was said, I think, on your show earlier, I mean, that clip there, the President looks in a relatively good state, bearing in mind what he's been going through over the last few days. But it's over the next 5 to 7 days that you get that point at the 7 to 10 day period where you really know if that virus is going to bite in a particular way or not. So I think it's one of those points. We have to remember this virus can hit very quickly. It affects different people in different ways, but we are learning new things about it as we go forward. And the scientists and the experts are showing that with the progress they're making on the vaccines and things like that.
And actually, even the President says the next few days will be the real test, he says, of his
Absolutely.
Recovery and the treatment for COVID. The other thing I wanted to ask about is, do you think there's a risk of a bit of a macho culture here? You know, you've got the President and Boris Johnson doing these video messages showing that they're still working through COVID, they're in their suits. And actually, would it not be a better example to say, look, we need to rest, this is a serious virus, we need to take it seriously?
Well, I think, to be fair, I think we have been saying to people, you've got to take the virus seriously. I don't doubt in
but
politics...
by leading by example, it does feel this, what Nigel Farage described it as like an alpha male sort of culture.
Well, I think there is always an element of anybody who's involved in public life, who's leading a team of people, wants to show that they are still able to lead and be able to give their team confidence about what they're doing. I think, to be fair, the Prime Minister, if you remember, when he was fit and able to, was putting messages out both from hospital and then quickly with video messages, outlining how ill he'd been, outlining how, not just thanking people, but thanking the NHS for the amazing work they've been doing for him and for others. And I think that highlighted an understanding of just how this virus can humble people.
Through it as well, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, but look, I think we've got a Prime Minister who's absolutely passionate and focused on delivering for people across the country and wants to make sure that we are continuing to do that, and will do everything he can at every point to deliver on that for the benefit of people across the UK.
OK. Now, I'm keen to pick up on the film that we showed a few moments ago about local lockdowns, these post-COVID lockdowns, if you like, which seem a really key part of the government strategy. They're not working, are they?
Well, I think they are, actually. I would disagree with you on that, Sophie. I think, first of all, that the World Health Organisation said the approach we're taking is strong, it's decisive. They've been complimentary about that. We've seen areas like Luton and Leicester who have gone into lockdown. We've seen the benefits of that. Their numbers have eased again. We've been able to change the situation in those places. I accept there are some parts of the country, I think you just had Greater Manchester on, where numbers are continuing to rise, and we've got to keep an eye on that. It's why it's so important that we all follow these guidelines and actually use the very simple things about washing our hands, keeping our face covered and keeping space.
But if you look at the data, Leicester is the only area of a local lockdown that now has lower case numbers. Luton, yes, dropped after the restrictions came in, but the numbers have gone back up again. Everywhere else, the case numbers are higher now than when the restrictions started. I think we can show you the data from Greater Manchester where we've been focusing. Now, they've been in lockdown for 9 weeks. You can see the second line there where the extra restrictions began, and cases have gone up fourfold in that time. This doesn't look like a strategy that's working to me.
Well, I would say it's quite a stark reminder. I think Luton's a good example about how it's a reminder we mustn't lose vigilance. We all have our own self-responsibility around making sure that we are following the guidelines and making sure that, wherever we live, we keep an eye on the government website, which gives the details for where you live in particular. And if you're in somewhere like Greater Manchester, not doing that social mixing, as we're advising people to do, following the guidelines, because this virus does spread. When you're face-to-face with people, when you're in close contact with people, if you're not following the guidelines, the virulence of this virus is frightening, and we've got to make sure that we all take responsibility for breaking that curve.
So looking at those increasing case numbers, are people in Greater Manchester not following the guidelines?
Well, all the data research we're doing is what the Department of Health will continue to look at to assess whether we've got the right restrictions in place at the right time in the right places, following what's happening there. I did see Andy Burnham at the moment just saying that his views that people in Greater Manchester are the majority of them following the guidelines. I think across the country, I have to say, I think the majority of people are following the guidelines. But can I just give you an example of this? You can see sometimes how one outbreak in one area can very quickly move. We've seen this even in Norfolk, where we had an issue with a particular company that's in an isolated place. But of course, the people who work there, if you're not careful, when they go home again, can very quickly spread this virus very, very easily. So it's why it's so important that we all keep that vigilance.
You were saying about how the Department for Health is monitoring how people are following the rules. What does the data on compliance show?
Well, at the moment, as Andy Burnham just said, we think the majority of people are following these rules.
But not everyone.
But that's why we've made sure we're being clear with people that enforcement is there. We're putting bigger penalties in place to remind people, actually, hopefully, to get people to see how important this is and why it matters. And let me just say so to anybody watching this today, everything we do has an impact. It has an impact not just on our own health, and if somebody feels that they can brave through this and don't need to do something, it's the impact it has on their friends, their family, and on the NHS, and our ability to manage and deal with this virus as quickly as we can.
So you say that the data shows that the majority of people are following the rules. But what is the actual compliance data? Can you give it to us?
Well, I can't give you the details of the compliance data now. What we're looking at around the country is...
I just don't really understand why you don't.
Well, we are publishing as much data as we can, as often as we can.
Not the compliance.
But on testing as well, as you saw, as you showed in your clip just a little bit earlier on. One of the other issues, of course, in understanding how many cases we've got is we're doing so much more testing, more than pretty much anywhere else in Europe, one of the most comprehensive programmes of testing anywhere in the world. And that also, obviously, allows us to identify more and more cases, which allows us to understand where this virus is spreading and how it's spreading.
On the testing, which, as you say, is a really important tool in our kit for trying to keep on top of the virus, a technical issue meant that 12,872 cases were added to the total yesterday.
Yep.
When you yourself acknowledge how important that is to work out where the virus is, where it's spreading, what went wrong?
Well, this is an issue between the 24th of September and the 1st of October. Those numbers have been put in as of yesterday, which is, as you say, has had that impact on the numbers. I would say, actually, this is a testament to how focused Department of Health, Public Health England and Test and Trace NHS are around assessing... that we're being transparent about this. We're publishing the figures daily. As soon as they have spotted there's been an issue, they've dug into that, they've got to the bottom of those numbers, they've been transparent and published the correct numbers, and, of course, the teams will be looking through how that happened to be sure it doesn't happen again. All the way through this, we've been looking at how we can share information with the public as quickly as we can, as transparently as we can, because that's part of explaining to people just how dangerous and how quickly this virus is in the way that it spreads. OK,
we've been talking a lot about compliance, how important it is that people follow the rules. And you can see why people might wonder why they should follow the rules if other people flout them. We saw the case of Margaret Ferrier, the MP who took that train from London to Glasgow knowing she'd just tested positive for coronavirus. Now, the SNP acted pretty swiftly. They stripped her of the whip. And this is what Nicola Sturgeon had to say. She said, "I've spoken to Margaret Ferrier and made clear my view that she should step down as an MP. Her actions were dangerous and indefensible." And I just want to compare that to what Boris Johnson said. This is what he said about Margaret Ferrier. "I think that's very much a matter for the Scottish National Party and for Nicola Sturgeon. What I would say about the rules is certainly that everyone should obey them." I mean, that is a pretty woolly statement. And I just put it to you, we all know the real reason that Boris Johnson isn't going out there and really criticising Margaret Ferrier. It's because he doesn't want to be accused of hypocrisy when Dominic Cummings kept his job after breaking the rules.
Actually, I think there's more than that. I don't think that's a fair assessment at all. I think they're very different situations. Apart from, I've commented before about the situation with Dominic and the fact that actually within the guidelines, it wasn't on the same scale at all of what Margaret.
I'm not trying to compare the scale. I'm comparing the reaction.
But I think
and the
what
fact
you're
that
seeing,
they're both breaking rules that everyone else is expected to follow.
Well, I'm not sure that's entirely correct, but Margaret certainly has done that. And what she has done by travelling on public transport, knowing she's got a positive test, is a whole different level. It's exactly what nobody should be doing. I think what the Prime Minister's statement implies is his belief that we all have to follow self-response, take care and responsibility for our own actions. And that's something Margaret should certainly do. I'm amazed she's still a member of the SNP, bearing in mind what Nicola Sturgeon has done. That would be the right action to take, and Margaret needs to do the right thing as well.
OK, keen to talk a bit about Brexit. How optimistic are you that we're going to get a trade deal?
Well, I'm always an optimist. I've always said, I think a trade deal is in the interest of our partners in the EU as much as it's in our interest. I think the negotiations are moving forward in a very structured way. I think we saw the statement yesterday from the Prime Minister and Ms van der Leyen, and around the fact that we're going to continue that work to try and get through these last few issues that hopefully mean we can get to a full and proper free trade agreement.
Now, the EU said this week that it was going to take legal action against the UK for passing the legislation that could override parts of the withdrawal agreement. Now, I just want to play a quick video of what you said about the Internal Markets Bill last month. Just have a little listen.
Honourable friend, yes, this does break international law in a very specific and limited way. We are taking the power to disapply the EU law concept of direct effect required by Article 4 in a certain, very tightly defined circumstances.
Now, there's been an awful lot said about that phrase you used, breaking international law in a limited and specific way. So I just want to know what happened. Were you reading from a script? Who wrote it?
Well, I think you can see that I'm very clearly reading from a script.
So
because I wanted to be very clear that I was given a very straight answer to a very specific question. What you haven't played there is what Bob Neal asked. He asked a very specific question. I'm a very firm believer. If somebody asks you a straight question, you give wherever you can as much of a straight answer as you can within the best knowledge that you have got. Well, because with the urgent question that we had, it seemed to me obvious that somebody was going to ask that very specific question.
So who wrote the script?
Well, the script was something that we put together at the Northern Ireland office, and it's a direct answer to the question. But I would just say this.
Was there number 10 involvement in it?
Let me just say this. One of the things that's very clear, and the point you made about the European Union, that they've issued about 800 letters of that type, I think, in the last year alone on different issues to different countries. Our focus is on securing a free trade agreement, in finishing the work of the Specialist Joint Committee, which is particularly focused on the Northern Ireland Protocol. And these clauses that we're talking about are the clauses that mean we can ensure that Northern Ireland businesses have unfettered access to the UK market. Something we promise, something the protocol itself promises, and something the EU says that it supports us and our drive to deliver.
The reason that I kind of brought back to what you said there about breaking the law in a limited and specific way is because, after the outcry, it felt like other members of the Cabinet distanced themselves from what you said. Your colleagues didn't exactly row in behind you. Do you think you were thrown under the bus?
No, not at all. And the Attorney-General's legal position on this also fully supported what I was saying. And the point we have made consistently through this is we want to secure all of the right deal through the Free Trade Agreement, through the Specialist Joint Committee. We've always said we want to give that certainty to Northern Ireland businesses that they'll have what we promised in our manifesto, as I say, in our command paper, which was warmly and positively received, including by the EU, actually. And this is delivering on that. And it's a safety net. It's purely an insurance policy that means we can deliver on that. Because if we get to that point, it's because everything else has broken down, because the Specialist Joint Committee, which is part of delivering the protocol, hasn't completed. And we are determined to ensure that we protect the peace and prosperity of Northern Ireland, and that means delivering on that promise of unfettered access.